Across the southern coast of Brittany, where the Atlantic wind moves steadily over fields of heather and stone, an immense prehistoric landscape unfolds in quiet precision. Stretching for kilometers across the commune of Carnac, thousands of standing stones rise from the earth in ordered lines. Some stand alone, others form dense alignments, and still others are arranged in circles or grouped near burial mounds. Together, they compose one of the most extensive Neolithic monuments in the world. These stones, known collectively as the Carnac alignments, have endured for over 6,000 years. Their age places them firmly within the Neolithic period, a time when human societies across Europe were undergoing profound transformations. Agriculture had taken root. Communities were becoming more settled. And with this stability came new forms of collective expression, structures that required coordination, labor, and shared purpose. Yet despite decades of study, the precise purpose of the Carnac stones remains unresolved. Archaeological evidence has clarified aspects of their construction and chronology, but the motivations behind their arrangement continue to invite careful interpretation. The landscape offers no single, definitive explanation. Instead, it presents a convergence of possibilities: ritual, territorial, astronomical, social, each supported by fragments of evidence, none fully conclusive. The Carnac complex is not a singular site but a broad constellation of features. The most prominent elements are the long rows of upright stones, or menhirs, which extend across several alignments, including those known as Menek, Kermerio, and Kurlisken. These alignments consist of parallel rows of stones, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, decreasing in size along their length. At the western ends, the stones tend to be larger and more imposing. Toward the east, they become smaller and more numerous. Archaeological surveys have revealed that many of these stones were carefully shaped and deliberately placed. Their arrangement is not random. The spacing between stones is often consistent, and the alignments themselves follow subtle variations in terrain. This suggests that the builders were not only capable of transporting and erecting large stones, but also of planning complex spatial layouts across considerable distances. Radiocarbon dating of associated features, such as nearby hearths, pottery fragments, and organic remains, places the primary construction phase between approximately 4,500 and 3,300 BC. This timeline situates the Carnac stones among the earliest large-scale stone monuments in Europe, predating structures like Stonehenge by several centuries. The scale of the undertaking raises immediate questions about the society that produced it. Neolithic communities in this region were not urbanized. They lacked metal tools, written language, and centralized political systems in the modern sense. Yet they organized the extraction, transport, and erection of thousands of stones, some weighing several tons. This implies a level of social coordination and shared intention that extends beyond simple subsistence. One line of interpretation considers the Carnac stones within the broader context of Neolithic ritual landscapes. Across Western Europe, this period saw the emergence of megalithic structures associated with burial practices, including dolmens and passage graves. In the vicinity of Carnac, such features are also present. Burial mounds, known as tumuli, and chambered tombs appear alongside the alignments, suggesting that the area held sustained ceremonial significance. Archaeological evidence from these burial sites indicates complex funerary practices. Human remains were often interred with grave goods, including tools, ornaments, and pottery. Some tombs show signs of repeated use, implying that they served as communal or ancestral burial places over generations. The proximity of these tombs to the stone alignments has led some scholars to propose that the entire landscape functioned as a ritual complex, where the living engaged with the memory of the dead. Within this framework, the alignments themselves may have held symbolic or ceremonial meaning. Their linear arrangement could have structured movement through the landscape, guiding participants along specific paths during ritual activities. The gradual change in stone size along the rows might have contributed to a visual or experiential progression, though the exact nature of such experiences remains speculative. Another area of investigation concerns the possibility of astronomical alignment. In several prehistoric sites across Europe, stone structures have been found to correspond with solar or lunar events, such as solstices and equinoxes. At Carnac, some researchers have examined whether the orientations of the stone rows align with celestial phenomena. The results have been mixed. Certain alignments appear to correspond loosely with solar positions, particularly at sunrise during specific times of the year. However, these correlations are not consistent across all rows, and the complexity of the site makes definitive conclusions difficult. Unlike more clearly defined structures such as Stonehenge, where specific sight lines can be directly observed, the Carnac alignments do not present a single focal point or central axis that unequivocally marks astronomical events. As a result, while astronomical considerations may have played a role in the planning of the site, the evidence remains inconclusive. Scholars generally approach this interpretation with caution, emphasizing the need to distinguish between intentional design and coincidental alignment. A further perspective considers the stones as markers of territory or social identity. During the Neolithic period, the establishment of agricultural practices led to increased attachment to specific areas of land. The construction of large, visible monuments may have served to delineate territory, signal group presence, or reinforce communal bonds. In this view, the sheer scale of the Carnac alignments could reflect the collective identity of the communities that built them. The effort required to erect the stones would have necessitated cooperation across multiple groups, potentially reinforcing social cohesion. The stones themselves, enduring across generations, may have acted as enduring symbols of that shared identity. Material analysis of the stones supports the idea of deliberate selection and transport. Many of the menhirs are composed of local granite, quarried from nearby outcrops. Evidence suggests that the stones were extracted using stone tools and transported using rollers, sledges, or other mechanical means. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that such methods, while labor-intensive, were feasible for Neolithic communities. The process of construction likely unfolded over extended periods, possibly spanning centuries. This raises the possibility that the site evolved over time, with successive generations adding to or modifying the alignments. If so, the meaning of the stones may also have shifted, adapting to changing social or cultural contexts. Despite these insights, significant gaps in understanding remain. The absence of written records means that interpretations must rely entirely on material evidence and comparative analysis. Even within the archaeological record, preservation is uneven. Some stones have fallen or been removed over time, and agricultural activity has altered parts of the landscape. Modern investigation has employed a range of techniques to address these challenges. Ground-penetrating radar, aerial surveys, and digital mapping have revealed previously unrecognized features beneath the surface. These technologies have helped reconstruct aspects of the original layout and identify patterns that are not immediately visible at ground level. Such findings have reinforced the impression that the Carnac landscape was more extensive and complex than previously understood. Subsurface anomalies suggest the presence of additional structures, possibly including wooden posts or smaller stones that have since disappeared. This broader context supports the idea that the visible stones represent only part of a larger, integrated system. Yet even as new data emerges, the central question persists: why were these stones arranged in this way, and for what purpose? The answer may not lie in a single explanation. Instead, it is possible that the Carnac stones fulfilled multiple functions simultaneously, their meaning layered and evolving. Ritual activity, social organization, territorial expression, and environmental awareness may all have contributed to their construction. What remains certain is that the Carnac alignments reflect a deliberate and sustained engagement with the landscape. They are not isolated artifacts but components of a wider cultural expression, one that required planning, cooperation, and a shared sense of purpose. As the wind continues to move through the rows of stone, the site offers no direct testimony. Its builders left no written account, no explicit statement of intent. What endures is the physical presence of the stones themselves, silent, ordered, and enduring, inviting careful observation and measured interpretation. In the absence of definitive answers, The Carnac Stones stand as a record of human activity at a formative moment in European prehistory. They mark a transition not only in technology and subsistence, but in the ways communities shape their environment to reflect collective meaning. Beyond the immediate visual impact of the Carnac alignments lies a broader archaeological landscape that deepens the complexity of interpretation. The standing stones do not exist in isolation. They are embedded within a network of related features that extend across the surrounding terrain. This wider context has become increasingly important in modern research, as archaeologists seek to understand not just the stones themselves, but the cultural system in which they were created. The region surrounding Carnac contains one of the densest concentrations of megalithic structures in Europe. In addition to the long stone alignments, there are dolmens, passage graves, tumuli, and isolated menhirs scattered across the landscape. These elements vary in form and function, yet they share a common chronology and material culture, suggesting that they were produced by related communities over overlapping periods of time. Among the most significant of these associated structures are the passage graves, which represent some of the earliest monumental burial sites in Western Europe. One prominent example is the nearby Gavrinis, located on an island within the Gulf of Morbihan. Although not part of the Carnac alignments themselves, Gavrinis provides valuable insight into the symbolic and artistic world of the Neolithic inhabitants of the region. Inside the passage grave at Gavrinis, intricately carved stones line the corridor and chamber walls. The engravings include abstract patterns, axes, and curved motifs, executed with a level of precision that suggests both technical skill and symbolic intent. While the exact meaning of these carvings remains uncertain, their presence indicates that Neolithic communities in this region engaged in complex forms of visual expression, likely tied to ritual or cosmological beliefs. The relationship between such burial sites and the Carnac alignments has been the subject of ongoing study. Some archaeologists propose that the alignments functioned as processional avenues leading toward ceremonial centers or burial locations. In this interpretation, the stones would have structured movement through the landscape, guiding participants along predetermined routes during communal gatherings or funerary rites. This idea is supported in part by the spatial organization of the alignments. At sites such as Menec, the rows of stones appear to converge towards circular enclosures, sometimes referred to as cromlechs. These circular arrangements, located at the ends of the alignments, may have served as focal points for ritual activity. Their enclosed form contrasts with the linear progression of the rows, suggesting a transition from movement to gathering. However, the evidence for processional use remains indirect. No definitive pathways or where patterns have been identified that would confirm repeated ceremonial movement. As with many aspects of the site, interpretation depends on the careful weighing of spatial patterns against the limitations of the archaeological record. Another line of inquiry focuses on the chronological development of the Carnac landscape. While early research often treated the alignments as a single, unified construction, more recent studies suggest that the site evolved over time. Variations in stone size, alignment orientation, and construction technique indicate that different sections may have been built during distinct phases. Radiocarbon dating from associated materials supports this phase development. Some alignments appear to have been established earlier than others, with subsequent additions extending or modifying the existing layout. This raises the possibility that the site was not conceived as a finished project, but rather grew incrementally, shaped by the needs and decisions of successive generations. If this is the case, then the meaning of the stones may have shifted over time. What began as a localized construction could have expanded into a regional monument, accumulating layers of significance as new groups engaged with the site. Such a process would be consistent with patterns observed at other prehistoric locations, where monuments were reused, reinterpreted, and integrated into evolving cultural practices. The question of labor organization is central to understanding how such a project could have been sustained. The extraction and transport of large stones required coordinated effort, and the scale of the Carnac alignments suggests participation beyond small, isolated communities. Estimates of labor investment vary, but even conservative calculations indicate that hundreds of individuals would have been involved over extended periods. This has led some researchers to consider the role of social structure in the construction of the site. While there is limited evidence for hierarchical leadership in Neolithic Brittany, the ability to mobilize large groups implies some form of collective organization. This may have taken the form of seasonal gatherings, where dispersed communities came together for shared activities, including monument building. Such gatherings could have served multiple purposes. In addition to facilitating construction, they may have reinforced social bonds, enabled the exchange of goods and information, and provided opportunities for ritual activity. The stones themselves, once erected, would have stood as enduring markers of these collective efforts, visible across the landscape and across generations. Environmental context also plays a role in shaping interpretation. During the Neolithic period, the landscape of Brittany was undergoing gradual transformation as forests were cleared for agriculture. Pollen analysis from sediment cores indicates a shift from dense woodland to more open terrain, reflecting human activity and land use. The placement of the Carnac alignments within this changing environment may have been deliberate. The stones are often situated on slightly elevated ground, enhancing their visibility. From certain vantage points, the rows extend toward the horizon, creating a visual continuity that integrates the monuments with the surrounding terrain. This integration has led some scholars to explore the possibility that the stones were used to structure perception of the landscape itself. Rather than serving a single functional purpose, they may have contributed to a broader spatial framework, organizing how individuals experienced and navigated their environment. Within this perspective, the alignments could be understood as part of a cultural landscape, one in which natural features and constructed elements were combined to create meaning. The repetition of vertical stones across horizontal ground creates a rhythmic visual pattern, one that may have held symbolic significance even if its precise interpretation is no longer accessible. Comparative studies with other megalithic regions offer additional context. Across Atlantic Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula to the British Isles, similar traditions of stone construction emerged during the Neolithic period. While the specific forms vary, common themes include the use of large stones, the association with burial practices, and the apparent importance of spatial arrangement. The presence of these shared elements has led to discussions about cultural transmission and interaction. Some researchers suggest that ideas and practices related to megalithic construction spread along coastal routes, facilitated by maritime travel. Others emphasize independent development, noting that similar environmental and social conditions could give rise to comparable solutions. In the case of Carnac, the density and scale of the monuments distinguish it from most other sites. While stone circles and alignments are found elsewhere, the concentration of over 3,000 standing stones within a relatively compact area is unique. This suggests that the region held particular significance, whether due to its resources, its location, or its cultural importance. Despite extensive study, the absence of written records continues to limit definitive conclusions. Interpretations must remain grounded in material evidence, and where that evidence is incomplete, uncertainty persists. This has led to a cautious approach within the field, one that prioritizes multiple working hypotheses over singular explanations. Historians and archaeologists continue to debate the relative importance of ritual, astronomy, social organization, and environmental factors in shaping the Carnac landscape. Each perspective contributes to a more nuanced understanding, yet none fully resolves the question of purpose. What emerges instead is a picture of complexity. The Carnac stones were not the product of a single moment or a single idea. They represent a sustained engagement with place, shaped by generations of human activity. Their arrangement reflects decisions made over time, influenced by changing conditions and evolving cultural practices. As research methods continue to advance, new data may refine existing interpretations or introduce new possibilities. For now, the Carnac alignments remain an open field of inquiry, one that invites careful observation, measured analysis, and an acceptance of the limits of current knowledge. In their enduring presence, the stones offer a connection to a distant past, not through explicit explanation, but through the material traces of human intention. They stand as evidence of a society capable of shaping its environment in lasting ways, even as the full meaning of those actions remains beyond complete recovery. As archaeological methods have advanced, the study of the Carnac alignments has shifted from isolated observation toward increasingly precise forms of landscape analysis. What once appeared as a series of static stone rows is now understood as part of a dynamic and carefully structured environment, one that can be examined through spatial modeling, geophysical survey, and environmental reconstruction. These approaches have not resolved the question of purpose, but they have clarified how deliberately the site was organized. At the core of this investigation is the recognition that the Carnac stones were placed with attention to both local terrain and broader orientation. The alignments do not follow a single uniform direction. Instead, they exhibit subtle variations in angle, often responding to the contours of the land. In some cases, the rows crest low ridges or descend gently into shallow depressions, maintaining their internal spacing while adapting to natural features. This responsiveness suggests that the builders were not imposing a rigid geometric grid, but rather integrating their constructions within the existing landscape. The stones appear to mark and emphasize the terrain rather than override it. This has led some researchers to propose that the alignments functioned as a means of articulating space, defining pathways, boundaries, or zones of activity within a broader cultural landscape. Geophysical surveys have added further depth to this interpretation. Techniques such as magnetometry and ground-penetrating radar have revealed subsurface anomalies beneath and around the visible stones. These include pits, post holes, and traces of smaller features that no longer survive above ground. In some areas, evidence suggests that wooden posts may once have accompanied or even preceded the stone alignments. If timber structures were part of the original design, this would introduce an additional layer of complexity. Wood, unlike stone, does not endure for millennia under most conditions, and its absence from the present landscape can obscure earlier phases of construction. The combination of stone and timber may have created a more varied and dynamic environment than is currently visible, with materials chosen for different purposes or symbolic associations. The presence of pits associated with some of the stones has also been examined closely. These pits often contain packing material used to stabilize the menhirs, but in certain cases they include deposits of charcoal, pottery fragments, or other materials. Such finds raise the possibility that the act of erecting a stone was accompanied by specific practices, potentially including offerings or rituals. However, the interpretation of these deposits remains cautious. While they may indicate deliberate placement, the exact meaning of such actions cannot be determined with certainty. Archaeologists must distinguish between evidence of human activity and assumptions about intention, a distinction that becomes particularly important in the absence of written records. Another avenue of research has focused on the orientation of the alignments in relation to celestial phenomena. Earlier studies often sought direct correlations between the stones and solar or lunar events, sometimes proposing precise alignments with solstices or equinoxes. More recent work has adopted a more measured approach, using statistical analysis to assess whether observed orientations differ significantly from what might occur by chance. Some patterns have emerged. Certain alignments appear to correspond broadly with the direction of sunrise during specific times of the year, particularly in the northeast. Others align with the setting sun in the southwest. Yet these correlations are not uniform across the entire site, and deviations are common. The variability complicates any attempt to attribute a singular astronomical function to the entire complex. Historians debate the extent to which these orientations were intentional. Some scholars argue that even approximate alignments could have held symbolic value, reflecting an awareness of seasonal cycles without requiring precise measurement. Others caution that without consistent and repeatable patterns, it is difficult to distinguish intentional design from coincidental alignment. The broader context of Neolithic Europe provides some support for the idea that celestial observation played a role in monument construction. Sites such as Newgrange demonstrate clear and deliberate alignment with solar events, particularly the winter solstice sunrise. However, the architectural form of Newgrange, a passage grave with a defined entrance and chamber, differs significantly from the open and linear arrangement of the Carnac stones. This difference in form may reflect differences in function. While Newgrange appears to focus attention on a specific moment and location, the Carnac alignments distribute attention across a wide area. Rather than directing the observer toward a single point, they create a field of repeated elements, each similar yet distinct. This repetition may have been central to their meaning, though its interpretation remains uncertain. Environmental reconstruction has also contributed to understanding how the site was experienced in its original context. During the Neolithic period, sea levels in the region were lower than they are today, and the coastline of Brittany extended further outward. The Gulf of Morbihan, now a sheltered inland sea, would have presented a different configuration of land and water. This shifting coastline may have influenced the placement of monuments. Some alignments appear to orient toward areas that would have been more prominent features in the Neolithic landscape, such as river valleys or coastal inlets. If so, the stones may have been positioned in relation to both terrestrial and maritime routes, potentially marking areas of movement or exchange. The role of movement itself has become an important theme in recent interpretations. Rather than viewing the stones as static markers, some researchers consider how individuals might have moved through the alignments. The parallel rows create corridors of space, guiding the direction of travel and shaping the visual experience of those within them. Walking between the stones, the perspective shifts continuously. Lines converge and diverge, stones overlap or separate depending on the angle of approach, and the horizon is intermittently obscured and revealed. This dynamic interplay between movement and perception may have been a deliberate aspect of the design, though its purpose, whether practical, symbolic, or experiential, remains open to interpretation. In this context, the Carnac alignments can be understood not only as objects, but as environments, spaces structured to influence how people moved, saw, and perhaps understood their surroundings. This perspective does not exclude other interpretations, such as ritual or territorial function, but rather complements them by emphasizing the experiential dimension of the site. Material analysis of the stones themselves has provided further insight. Most of the menhirs are composed of local granite, with variations in texture and composition reflecting different source outcrops. In some cases, the stones appear to have been selected for specific characteristics, such as shape or surface quality. This suggests that the builders exercised choice not only in placement but also in material selection. Transporting these stones would have required significant effort. Experimental studies indicate that teams of individuals could move large stones using wooden rollers, ropes, and coordinated pulling. The process would have been time-consuming and labor-intensive, particularly for the largest menhirs, some of which weigh several tons. The investment of labor implies that the stones held importance beyond immediate practical use. Whether that importance was social, symbolic, or functional, it was sufficient to justify sustained effort over extended periods. This reinforces the idea that the Carnac landscape was central to the communities that built and maintained it. Yet even with these advances in understanding, the central question persists. The stones are arranged with care, integrated into the landscape, and associated with other significant structures. They reflect planning, labor, and continuity. But their ultimate purpose, whether singular or multiple, remains unresolved. Archaeological evidence suggests patterns. It reveals relationships between features, traces of construction, and indications of use. It allows for comparison with other sites and for the development of plausible interpretations. But it does not provide direct access to the intentions or beliefs of the people who built the alignments. As a result, interpretation must remain provisional. Scholars continue to examine the site from multiple perspectives, refining hypotheses and testing them against new data. In doing so, they acknowledge both the richness of the evidence and the limits of what it can reveal. The Carnac Stones endure not as a solved problem, but as an ongoing inquiry, one that reflects the complexity of human activity in the distant past. As interpretations of the Carnac landscape have developed, increasing attention has been given to the social and cultural context in which the stones were erected. While the physical evidence provides insight into construction methods and spatial organization, it also raises broader questions about the communities responsible for such an undertaking. Understanding the social framework of Neolithic Brittany is essential for approaching the possible purposes of the alignments, even if definitive conclusions remain out of reach. During the period between approximately 4,500 and 3,300 BCE, communities in what is now Brittany were part of a wider transformation occurring across Europe. The adoption of agriculture brought more patterns of settlement, with small groups cultivating crops, managing livestock, and establishing long-term habitation sites. Archaeological evidence suggests that these communities were relatively small, often consisting of extended family groups rather than large centralized populations. Despite this, the construction of large-scale monuments such as those at Carnac indicates a capacity for cooperation that extended beyond individual settlements. The coordination required to quarry, transport, and erect thousands of stones implies that multiple groups came together for shared purposes. This has led to the interpretation that Carnac may have functioned as a gathering place, a location where dispersed communities periodically assembled. Such gatherings may have been seasonal, possibly linked to agricultural cycles. Periods of reduced farming activity could have allowed time for collective labor and ceremonial events. In this context, monument construction itself may have been part of a broader social process, one that reinforced relationships between groups and contributed to a shared sense of identity. Anthropological comparisons with other non-industrial societies suggest that large communal projects often serve multiple roles simultaneously. They can act as expressions of social cohesion, mechanisms for organizing labor, and occasions for ritual activity. While direct parallels must be drawn carefully, this perspective provides a framework for understanding how the Carnac alignments might have been embedded within the social life of their builders. Material culture from the region offers additional clues. Excavations have uncovered pottery fragments, stone tools, and personal ornaments such as beads and pendants. These items reflect a degree of craftsmanship and variation, indicating that communities were not isolated but engaged in exchange networks. Some materials, including certain types of stone used for tools, appear to have been transported over considerable distances. This movement of materials suggests that communication and interaction extended beyond the immediate area. The Carnac region, situated near the coast, may have been part of maritime routes that connected different parts of Atlantic Europe. Boats capable of coastal travel are known to have existed during the Neolithic, and the exchange of goods and ideas along these routes may have contributed to the spread of megalithic traditions. Within this broader network, the Carnac alignments may have held regional significance. Their scale and visibility would have distinguished them from smaller, more localized monuments. For communities traveling through or visiting the area, the stones may have served as a recognizable landmark, a place associated with shared practices or gatherings. The question of leadership within these communities remains uncertain. Archaeological evidence does not clearly indicate the presence of a hierarchical ruling class during this period in Brittany. Burials associated with the region, while sometimes containing grave goods, do not consistently display the kind of marked inequality seen in later societies. This has led many scholars to suggest that social organization was relatively egalitarian, with authority distributed rather than centralized. If this interpretation is accurate, then the construction of the Carnac stones would have required forms of coordination that did not rely on coercive power. Instead, participation may have been motivated by shared beliefs, traditions, or mutual obligations. The act of building itself could have been a communal expression, reinforcing social ties rather than demonstrating dominance. Ritual practice remains one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the Carnac alignments, though it is also one of the most difficult to define. The association of the stones with burial sites suggests that concepts related to ancestry and memory may have been important. In many prehistoric societies, the treatment of the dead was closely linked to the identity of the living, with burial places serving as points of continuity across generations. The presence of tumuli and passage graves in the vicinity of the alignments supports the idea that the landscape held long-term significance. Some burial sites show evidence of repeated use, indicating that they were revisited and maintained over extended periods. This continuity suggests that the Carnac region may have functioned as a focal point for ancestral connection. Within this framework, the standing stones could have contributed to the creation of a commemorative landscape. Their permanence contrasts with the more transient nature of daily life, offering a durable marker of collective presence. Whether they were intended to represent individuals, events, or abstract concepts is not known, but their enduring form implies a concern with continuity and memory. At the same time, historians debate whether the stones themselves were directly linked to burial practices. Unlike dolmens or passage graves, the menhirs do not contain human remains. This distinction has led some scholars to propose that the alignments served a different function, perhaps complementing rather than duplicating the role of burial monuments. One possibility is that the stones marked areas of significance within the landscape without being tied to specific individuals. They may have delineated zones used for gathering, ritual activity, or seasonal events. Alternatively, they could have served as markers of movement, guiding participants through spaces that held symbolic meaning. The absence of clear evidence for one interpretation over another has encouraged a multifunctional approach. Rather than seeking a single purpose, some researchers suggest that the Carnac alignments may have fulfilled several roles simultaneously, their meaning shaped by context and use. This perspective acknowledges the complexity of human behavior and the likelihood that different aspects of the site were emphasized at different times. The long duration of construction further supports this view. If the alignments were built and modified over centuries, then the communities involved would have experienced changes in environment, social structure, and cultural practice. The stones, once erected, would have remained as fixed elements within a changing context, open to reinterpretation by later generations. This raises the possibility that the meaning of the Carnac stones was not static, but evolved over time. What may have begun as a particular form of expression could have been adapted to new purposes, incorporated into new traditions, or understood differently as circumstances changed. Such processes are observed in other archaeological contexts, where monuments are reused or recontextualized long after their initial construction. The enduring presence of the stones would have made them a constant feature of the landscape, visible across generations. For those living in the region, they would have formed part of the everyday environment, yet their scale and arrangement would have distinguished them from ordinary features. This combination of familiarity and distinction may have contributed to their significance. Modern archaeological practice continues to explore these questions through a combination of excavation, survey, and comparative analysis. Each new discovery adds detail to the broader picture, yet also reinforces the complexity of interpretation. The Carnac alignments resist simple explanation, not because they lack meaning, but because their meaning was likely multifaceted and context-dependent. In considering their purpose, it becomes necessary to move beyond singular narratives and to accept a degree of uncertainty. The evidence supports a range of possibilities: ritual, social, territorial, environmental, each grounded in aspects of the archaeological record. None can be confirmed exclusively, and all must be considered within the limits of available data. What remains clear is that the Carnac stones were the product of deliberate human action, shaped by the values and practices of Neolithic communities. They reflect a capacity for organization, a connection to place, and an engagement with shared forms of expression. Their purpose may not be fully recoverable, but their existence provides a tangible link to the social world in which they were created. Over the course of the last 2 centuries, the Carnac alignments have also become a subject of sustained modern investigation, shaped by changing archaeological methods and evolving interpretive frameworks. Early antiquarian interest in the site, particularly during the 18th and 19th centuries, often approached the stones through the lens of classical or mythological comparison. Some observers attributed their construction to the Celts, while others proposed connections to Druids or even earlier legendary cultures. These interpretations reflected the limited archaeological knowledge of the time and the absence of reliable dating techniques. The development of modern archaeology in the late 19th and early 20th centuries marked a turning point. Systematic excavation, stratigraphic analysis, and later radiocarbon dating provided a clearer chronological framework, placing the Carnac stones firmly within the Neolithic period. This shift allowed researchers to move away from speculative historical associations and toward evidence-based interpretation. One of the most significant contributors to the study of Carnac was the Scottish archaeologist James Milne, who conducted extensive excavations in the region during the late 19th century. His work was later continued by Zachary Le Ruzic, whose detailed surveys and documentation helped establish a more comprehensive understanding of the site. Their efforts laid the foundation for subsequent research, preserving information about features that might otherwise have been lost to agricultural activity or stone removal. Indeed, the preservation of the Carnac alignments has been an ongoing concern. Over the centuries, many stones were displaced, repurposed, or destroyed. Local populations sometimes used the stones as building material, incorporating them into walls, houses, or roads. Agricultural expansion also altered the landscape, with fields plowed and leveled in ways that disrupted the original arrangement of the alignments. By the 20th century, recognition of the site's archaeological importance led to increased efforts at protection. The French government implemented measures to preserve the remaining stones, restricting development and establishing the area as a protected heritage site. Today, the Carnac alignments are managed with careful attention to conservation, balancing public access with the need to prevent further damage. Modern technology has significantly expanded the scope of research. Aerial photography, LiDAR scanning, and geographic information systems have enabled archaeologists to map the site with a level of precision previously unattainable. These tools have revealed patterns that are not immediately visible from the ground, including subtle variations in alignment orientation and previously unrecognized features beneath the surface. One of the key outcomes of these methods has been a more refined understanding of the spatial organization of the site. Rather than viewing the alignments as isolated rows, researchers now analyze them as components of a broader network. This network includes not only visible stones but also subsurface features, nearby burial structures, and the surrounding topography. Such analysis has reinforced the idea that the Carnac landscape was intentionally structured. The placement of stones appears to reflect both practical considerations, such as terrain and material availability, and more abstract factors, which may include symbolic or social dimensions. However, the precise nature of these abstract factors remains difficult to define. In recent decades, interdisciplinary approaches have become increasingly important. Archaeologists collaborate with specialists in geology, anthropology, environmental science, and even acoustics to explore different aspects of the site. Geological studies have examined the sourcing of stone materials, identifying specific outcrops from which the menhirs were likely extracted. This work helps reconstruct the logistical processes involved in construction, including the distances over which stones were transported. Anthropological perspectives contribute to the interpretation of social organization and ritual practice, drawing on cross-cultural comparisons to suggest how large-scale communal projects might function within non-hierarchical societies. Environmental studies provide insight into the landscape as it existed during the Neolithic period, reconstructing vegetation patterns, climate conditions, and changes in sea level. Acoustic research, though more exploratory, has investigated how sound behaves within the alignments. Some studies suggest that the arrangement of stones may influence the way sound travels through the space, potentially creating areas of resonance or attenuation. While such findings are preliminary and not universally accepted, they highlight the range of sensory experiences that may have been associated with the site. Historians debate the extent to which these modern analytical frameworks can fully capture the intentions of Neolithic builders. While technological tools allow for increasingly detailed observation, they do not provide direct access to the cultural meanings that shaped construction. As a result, interpretation continues to rely on a combination of empirical evidence and cautious inference. The Carnac alignments have also become part of a broader discussion about the nature of prehistoric monuments. Rather than viewing such structures as static or singular in purpose, many scholars now emphasize their dynamic and multifaceted character. Monuments are understood as places that accumulate meaning over time, shaped by repeated use, reinterpretation, and changing social contexts. In this view, the purpose of the Carnac stones cannot be reduced to a single function. Instead, they may have served as a framework within which different activities occurred: ritual gatherings, social interactions, territorial marking, or even practical navigation. The significance of the stones may have varied depending on who engaged with them and under what circumstances. The concept of landscape memory has become particularly relevant in this context. This idea suggests that physical features within a landscape can act as repositories of collective memory, preserving associations that persist across generations. The Carnac stones, with their scale and durability, would have been well suited to this role. Their presence could anchor stories, traditions, or practices, even as specific details changed over time. At the same time, it is important to recognize the limits of such interpretations. Without written records, the content of any associated beliefs or narratives cannot be recovered directly. Archaeology can identify patterns of behavior and material traces, but it cannot fully reconstruct the symbolic systems that gave those patterns meaning. The ongoing study of the Carnac alignments reflects this balance between discovery and uncertainty. Each new method contributes additional detail, refining our understanding of how the site was constructed and used. Yet the fundamental question of purpose remains open, not because of a lack of effort, but because of the inherent challenges of interpreting prehistoric evidence. In the present day, the stones continue to occupy a dual role. They are both archaeological artifacts and elements of a living landscape, visited by researchers, tourists, and local communities. Their preservation ensures that they remain accessible for future study, while also maintaining their place within the cultural heritage of France. As the field of archaeology continues to evolve, new approaches may offer further insight into the Carnac alignments. Advances in dating techniques, material analysis, and digital modeling hold the potential to refine existing interpretations or reveal previously unrecognized patterns. However, it is likely that some aspects of the site will remain uncertain, reflecting the distance in time between the present and the Neolithic past. This uncertainty does not diminish the significance of the Carnac stones. Rather, it underscores the complexity of human history and the challenges of reconstructing it from material remains. The alignments stand as a testament to the capacity of early societies to shape their environment in enduring ways, even as the full meaning of those actions continues to invite careful and measured inquiry. In their silence, the stones do not conceal a single hidden answer. Instead, they present a landscape of possibilities, grounded in evidence yet open to interpretation, a record of human activity that resists simplification while continuing to inform our understanding of the distant past.